Yes. All right, so today we're going over some trigonometry. Okay. So if you've ever heard the phrase like SOHCAHTOA, that's what we're gonna go over today. Okay. It's a nice mnemonic to try and help you remember what each of these are. So, the steepness of a hiking trail is often expressed as a percent of grade. The steepest part of Bright Angel Trail in the Grand Canyon National Park has about a 15.7% grade. This means that the trail rises or falls 15.7 feet over a horizontal distance of 100 feet. You can use trigonometric ratios to determine that the steepness is equivalent to an angle of about 9 degrees. So you can find out what that angle measure is given those two sides. Or if you're given the angle, you could figure out one of the other sides. Okay? So trigonometry comes from two Greek terms. First one is trigon, meaning triangle. And metron, meaning measure. Okay, so the study of trigonometry involves triangle measurement. Okay, so we're finding either the sides or the angles within this triangle, those different measures. So trigonometric ratio is a ratio or fraction. Okay, so it'll be written as that fraction of the length of two sides of a right triangle. Okay, it does need to be a right triangle to use these. Okay, so you have to identify that 90-degree angle in your triangle before you start using sine, cosine, and tangent. So again, in bold there, for right triangles only. So the three most common trig ratios are sine, that's how you pronounce it, sine, cosine, and tangent. So the abbreviation for sine, we use SIN. Guess it looks like sin, but it's still considered sine. The abbreviation for cosine is COS. And for tangent is just TAN or tan. Okay, so those are the abbreviations that we're going to use. On your calculator, if you have a scientific calculator with you, you could locate each of those buttons. So if I show you mine here, sine is right here, SIN, cosine, COS, and tangent, TAN. You have those buttons on your calculator. Okay? And if you need help locating those, if you have a different calculator than I do, I will help you with that, yes. Yes. So for sine, cosine, and tangent, you always want to go from an angle, okay? So that's why in that next piece there it says sine of A. Okay, you can see that sign of that capital letter. It's referring to an angle. So when we're finding sine of angle A, you're going to take the opposite side over the hypotenuse. Okay, so going from angle A, right here, your opposite side is the side across. Okay, and your hypotenuse is always opposite that 90 degrees, so that would be your hypotenuse over here. So if we're trying to write out the ratio of sides, or that fraction, for sine of angle A, you go from angle A, you need the opposite side. In this case, it's that lowercase a. So I can write lowercase a over the hypotenuse. Okay, the hypotenuse is going to be over here, so that's C. Okay, so sine of angle A would be A over C. Now when looking at sine of angle B, that capital B there, you're going to go from this angle, okay? And you still want that opposite side from that angle, okay? So from this angle, the opposite side would be lowercase b, okay? So I'd have b over, and the hypotenuse always stays the same, so that would be c. Okay, so you're writing out these ratio of sides. Okay, so sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine of your angle is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. Now, adjacent meaning next to. It's the side next to it. So if I'm looking at cosine of angle A, so again, I want to start at that angle. And I want the adjacent side. Now, there's two sides that are next to that angle, right? But one of them is considered what? The hypotenuse. So it can't be considered the adjacent side. Okay, so if one of your sides is the hypotenuse because it's next to, it can't be considered that adjacent side. The other side would be considered your adjacent side. So with cosine of angle A, my adjacent side would be side B. Okay, so I'd have B over, then the hypotenuse, again, is always going to stay the same here. That would be side C. Now cosine of angle B, starting from this side, this angle right here. The adjacent side would be A, because C again is the hypotenuse. So your adjacent side is A. That'll be over C for the hypotenuse. Okay, the last one we have is tangent. Okay, tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay, so in this one, we're not using the hypotenuse. Okay, so you have opposite over adjacent. So for tangent of angle A, again, going to my angle, we need the opposite side, so the side across from that angle, be lowercase a, over the adjacent side to that angle, again, not the hypotenuse, but that other side would be B. And then tangent of angle B, going from angle B, we need the opposite side from that angle, so across, that would be lowercase b, over the adjacent side to angle B, so the side next to, so that would be A. Okay, again, it's not C because C is the hypotenuse. We'd have over A. Questions? Okay, so what I said before, we can use SOHCAHTOA. So this is how I write it. So I have SO, S-O over H, because it's opposite over hypotenuse, right? Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Then CA, which is cosine, and then adjacent over hypotenuse. And then TOA would be T for tangent, and then opposite over adjacent. Okay, so that's where you get this SOHCAHTOA from. SOHCAHTOA. Okay? If you say it in your head, you can then write it out. Okay, like this. Then you know, okay, if I have an opposite and a hypotenuse, I'm going to use sine. If I have an adjacent and a hypotenuse, I'm going to use cosine. And if I have opposite and adjacent, I'll use tangent. Okay? So good things to remember here. So trig ratios are found from the acute angles of a right triangle. So again, it has to be a right triangle, and you're using these ratios with the acute angles. Notice how we did not use angle C for any of these three. Okay? We didn't use angle C for any of those three. You cannot find trig ratios of the right angle. So you cannot go sine of angle C. Okay? Cannot go sine of angle C. If I tried to do that opposite over hypotenuse, sine of that angle, well, opposite is the hypotenuse. Okay? We can't do our trig ratios with that 90-degree angle. So, examples. Well, first, we're not going to find the decimal. You can cross that off. We're going to find the fraction. So just kind of like what we were doing in that table above. Now, angles P and Q are what kind of angles? What kind of angles would they be? If this is a 90-degree angle, it's a right angle. What are those other two angles? They're acute angles. Okay, so they're acute angles, meaning they are less than 90 degrees. Okay, they are smaller than 90 degrees. And you have to use those angles with your trig ratios. So I'm going to do a couple here with you. So this first one, we want to find the fraction, okay, or ratio for sine of angle P. So to do this, I'm going to go to that angle. You can put your pencil right on it so you know that's the one you're working with. Now for sine, if you look at the table above, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Okay? So I need to go to the opposite side from angle P. Okay, that would be side 15. So I can write 15 for the opposite side. That's over the hypotenuse, which is opposite that 90-degree angle. So 17. Okay? That would be your fraction or your ratio of sides. Okay? For number 2, you have cosine of angle P. So again, starting at angle P, cosine is adjacent side over the hypotenuse. So your adjacent side would be the side next to that angle. So this would be 8 over your hypotenuse, which is 17. Good. Okay, then number 3, again, we're working with angle P in this one. So you need the tangent of angle P. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So from angle P, find the opposite side, or the side across. That would be 15. Over the adjacent side, which is 8. Okay, your adjacent side again is not 17 to angle P because that's the hypotenuse and always will be. Your adjacent side would be the other side next to that angle. Questions? All right, I want you guys to find 4, 5, and 6. You want to write out that ratio just like we did for 1, 2, and 3. Except this time you're going from angle Q. All right, so looking at number 4, we're taking sine of angle Q. So from this angle, we need the opposite side. Okay, that's 8. Over the hypotenuse, which is 17. For 5, we're taking cosine of angle Q. So from angle Q, we need the adjacent side, or the side next to, which is 15. Over the hypotenuse, again across from that 90-degree angle, is 17. Then number 6, tangent of angle Q. So tangent is the opposite side, so the side across, which is 8. Over the adjacent side, so the side next to, is 15. Questions? All right, on the back, if you want more practice with this, make sure you go through number 7. I'm not going to go through it, but if you need more practice writing out the ratios, do number 7. Number 8, we want to find the tangent of 30 degrees to the nearest hundredth. So from here, okay, we're talking about this angle. That's your 30-degree angle. We want tangent of that angle. So we want to write out tangent of 30. Okay? They're telling us to find the tangent of that 30-degree angle. So what I want to do with this is write out that ratio of sides. So that you don't have to flip your paper back over, I'm going to write out SOHCAHTOA here for you. All right, so what is tangent? What's the ratio of sides for tangent? Yes, tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay, that's that T part there, and you have O over A, so opposite over adjacent. So I'm going to set that tangent of 30 equal to, from that 30-degree angle, we're going to write out the opposite side. Okay, in this case, the opposite side is x. So I'm going to have x over the adjacent side is x times the square root of 3. Okay, here's my ratio of sides. What happens if I have x over x? They cancel out. Okay, so if those cancel out, I'm left with 1 over this, square root of 3. Now what do? I don't want this square root in the denominator. How do I fix that? Yep. Good. Okay, I multiply by that version of 1, right? So I'm going to multiply the top by square root of 3 and the bottom by square root of 3. Okay, then I can multiply straight across. So I have 1 times square root of 3 is square root of 3. Over, if I have square root of 3 times the square root of 3, it's the square root of 9, right? What's the square root of 9? 3. Okay, so this is your exact answer. However, it did ask for the nearest hundredth. So we could plug that into our calculator. So just being careful as I do this, I'm going to take that square root of 3, and I'm going to press enter. Okay, and then I'm going to divide by 3 and press enter again. Okay, so if I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth here, I would have 0.58. Okay? So either of those answers would be correct. Questions on 8? All right, I'm going to skip 9. I know I'm skipping. It's okay. I'm going to go to 10. So a certain part of a hiking trail slopes upward about 5 degrees. After traveling a horizontal distance of 100 feet along this part of the trail, what would be the change in the hiker's vertical position? So if you look at your picture here, this is your sloping upward of 5 degrees. Okay, you can see it in that triangle there. It's pointing to that angle. Okay, your horizontal distance is that bottom line. That's 100 feet. They told us that. Now your vertical position would be over here. Okay, got a little cut off. That's an X. Okay, that's X. That's your variable. So that's what we want to find. Okay, we want to find that vertical position. So when I set these problems up, I'm only given one side of this right triangle. Okay, and there is a box in the corner here. I know the hole punch kind of cut it off. But there's that box indicating it is a right triangle. So I need to use my trig ratios, either sine, cosine, or tangent. But we need to figure out which one to use. So if I go from my angle, I'm looking for that vertical position, right? So that has to be one of the sides I need in my ratio. Okay? So if I look over here, that's where X is. What side would that be considered in my trig ratios? Opposite. Because I'm going from this angle and I'm going across, so that would be your opposite side. So I'm going to label it with an O. Now I don't have this length, right? That's Y. That's another variable. What's the other length I do have? 100. Now from that angle again, which side is that? That's the adjacent side. Okay? Now after I labeled these, which trig ratio do you think I'm going to use? If I have this O and this A. Look at SOHCAHTOA. If I have an O and an A. Say louder. Say louder. Tangent. Okay? So I'm going to use tangent because I have an O and an A labeled in my picture. Okay? So, to set this up, you're going to use your trig function of tangent. Now your angle that you're going from has to be attached to that. Okay, so it'll be tangent of 5. Okay, that will be equal to your ratio of sides. Now tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay, your opposite side is your variable X over the adjacent side is 100. Okay, so from here, what I want to do is solve for X. Okay, so how can I get X by itself? I'm going to multiply by 100. If I do that to this side of my equation, I have to do it to this side as well. Okay? So on that right-hand side, those 100s will cancel. So I'm left with 100 times tangent of 5. And that'll be equal to X. I'm going to show you how to enter this in your calculator. So if you have your calculator, make sure you bring that out. First thing though, I know it's hard to see, in that bottom right-hand part of your calculator, it should say DEG. Okay? It should say DEG. Is that a little bit easier to see? So, right here, it should say DEG. If it says RAD, you need to change your setting. Anybody have RAD? Right here on their calculator. Or are we in degree? Okay. Okay, so you want to be in degrees because you're working with degrees. You're not working with radians. Okay, RAD is radians, and you don't want that setting. You'll get the wrong answers, or it'll give you an error. So, to enter this into my calculator, I'm going to take 100 times, I'm going to press my tangent button, so that tan button there, right here. And then I'm going to press 5 and end my parenthesis. Okay, so if you have a calculator like this, yep, that's all you need to do. You can just read it left to right, type it into your calculator, and press enter.
Okay, mine is really weird. Camira, what's up? No, it's not.
No, she has to do it like backwards. So I'll show you how to do it. So X should be about 8.75 feet. All right, let me see if I can find a different calculator. That works. That one doesn't work. I need a different calculator. Press second then. So you don't want to press the shift button before you press it. If you do have a different calculator, I'll show you how to do it after I do the next part of this example. Okay? So, in the next part, we want to find the distance that the hiker traveled. Okay, so the distance he traveled up that incline. Which variable is that on my picture? Y. Okay, I want to solve for y this time. So again, I want to use these trig ratios, right? So I'm going to go from the only angle that I'm given that's acute. So again, it's 5 degrees. Now in my picture, y is considered what side? Hypotenuse. Now what is the other side that I was given? Yep. Well, you were given x, but I found that, right? And that's opposite. I don't want to use my opposite side because I rounded with that one. Okay, it's not going to give me a more exact answer. So you are given the adjacent side here. Okay, that was 100. It was exact. That's the one I want to use. So if I have the adjacent side and the hypotenuse, which one of my 3 trig ratios should I use? If I have adjacent and hypotenuse, which one of my 3?
C. C. Cosine.
C. C. Okay? You're going to use cosine.
I don't get this. I get it.
Okay? We're going to use cosine because I'm given the adjacent side and I want to find the hypotenuse. Okay? So here I'm going to use cosine. So I'm going to write out cosine of the angle that I was working with. Okay, that was angle 5. That'll be equal to that ratio of sides. So the adjacent, which is 100, over the hypotenuse, which is y. Now with this one, it's a little bit different. Notice in our first example, our variable was on top, right? This one, it's on the bottom or in the denominator. When you're solving these trig ratio equations, you're always going to multiply both sides by whatever's in the denominator. Okay? So here I'm going to multiply by y, and I have to do that same thing on the left-hand side. So that way on the right here, they cancel out. And I have y times the cosine of 5 is equal to 100. Now if I'm solving for y, what would my next step be? To cross over? What could I do? What if I said it was 2y equals 100? What would you do? You would divide, right? So here, I'm going to divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by the cosine of 5. Okay? That way on the left, those ones cancel out. Okay, so I'm left with y is equal to 100 over cosine of 5. Now that cosine of 5 is all one thing. Don't separate cosine and separate 5. They are one number together. Cosine is nothing without that angle attached to it. Okay, sine is nothing without that angle attached to it. Tangent is nothing without that angle attached to it. You have to have that number angle attached. So here, I can enter this again into my calculator. Okay, so we're going to take 100 divided by, this time we're going to press that COS button, so cosine, and then 5, and I'm going to end my parenthesis and press enter. Okay, and it will be 100.38. Okay, questions? Yes, I'll show you on your calculator.
I'm buying a new one anyways. I don't get that one.
All right, so for the next few examples, number 11, you're going to do the same process, okay? So I'm going to help you set this one up, and then I want you to solve it. So you want to go from your angle, okay? And you want to identify the sides of that triangle from that angle. So which sides do I have given this angle here? Okay, so I have the adjacent, which is next to, right? What's the other side I have? If I go across from that angle? Opposite. Okay? So after you label those sides, you need to identify which trig ratio you need to use. Good job. It is tangent. Okay, so write it out, and then I want you to try and solve. Okay? If you have a different type of calculator, I'm going to show you how to use that. I want you guys to finish number 11. Okay, finish number 11. Anybody else have a different type of calculator? So that would be if you're dividing. Start with 100. By, and you're gonna put this part All right, anybody else with a weird calculator? All right, let's sit down so I can go through number 11 now. So, number 11, we said we're using tangent, right? Because we have the opposite and the adjacent. So we're going to take tangent of the angle we're working with. So of 25. That angle is always attached to that trig function. Okay, so it's always with an angle. That will be equal to the ratio of your sides, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So we have x over 18. What's my next step? What do I do to solve for x? 18 on both sides. So I'm multiplying by 18 on both sides, so they cancel out here. So I have 18 times the tangent of 25 equals x, and I could plug this into my calculator. Yes. Oh, what's the answer? Good. Nope. Okay, so you should have gotten x is equal to 8.39. Number 12. Okay, which angle am I going to go from? 70. Okay? What are my two sides I'm given? And the adjacent. Good. Okay, so I'm given the hypotenuse and the adjacent side. That'll be C. Okay, it is cosine. So we're going to write cosine of what? 70. That angle measure always gets attached to that trig function. That's equal to your ratio of sides. So we have the adjacent side, 15, over hypotenuse is x. What's my next step? What's my next step in solving for x? So I'm going to multiply by x on each side. Okay, so again, when you're solving, you always want to multiply both sides by whatever's in that denominator. Okay, in this case, it's x. So they cancel on that right side. So we have x times the cosine of 70. Too much talking. Equals 15. Next step is, divide. So I'm going to divide by the cosine of 70 on both sides. They cancel out here. So x is equal to 15 over cosine of 70. I do want you to write this out, because if I see that you did your algebra correctly here, but somehow you entered into your calculator wrong and you got the incorrect answer, say if you have a weird calculator or something like that, at least you did this part right, okay? And you'll get it correct, okay? So even if you don't enter it in your calculator correctly, you'll at least have that math part correct. So what's my answer for X? 43.86. Did you not do it right? No. Press 15.
I did.
15 divide 70 cosine equals.
Will the following students please report to the office?
If you borrowed a calculator, please give it back to me.
Ryan Brewer.
If you haven't finished those 8.3 assignments yet, finish those for tomorrow, please.
Thank you.
Otherwise, you have no homework.
Please report to room 1712 as soon as possible. Custodian to room 1712, please. Thank you.
The papers by the door aren't for you guys.
Unless you want to do it.
They're not there yet.